Jessica, the Museum Guide, and today I'm at the London Postal Museum to ride the festive mail rail, have a look at some Christmas cards, and explore the history of how our Christmas post gets from A to B in the UK and beyond. The Postal Museum in London chronicles the surprisingly fascinating history of Royal Mail, including the wonderful mail rail attraction that I'm going to ride a little bit later on. It's Christmas time right now, but while we do have some festive displays and Christmassy bits of history on our tour today, this is still a great video to watch no matter what time of year it is, if I do say so myself. It's a relatively recent museum. The Postal Museum got its start back in 2004 and opened here under the Postal Heritage Trust in 2017. I came for the history of letters to Santa and Christmas cards, but I soon realized that I needed to expand my video to include some of the permanent displays. This is a very well done museum, and I enjoyed every minute I spent here. You don't have to be a stamp collector or postal nerd, but if you are, welcome to you too. And of course, if you're a returning subscriber, I'm glad you're back. If you're interested in watching more content, or you want to give a great gift to someone who does, head over to my Patreon account, just linked above and below, where I release an extra video every month, as well as a bunch of other exclusives like blogs and even in-person tours. Do remember that you can book me for in-person tours of museums and oddities in London. My contact details are below. It's a fun and festive video today, so make sure you stick around until the end, because I'm going to ride the holiday-themed mail rail, the underground railway system that used to deliver mail all throughout London, 70 feet or 20 meters below the ground. I'm releasing a full version of the mail rail ride over on Patreon as a special Christmas bonus for all membership levels, including the free level, so go on over and check it out. The first thing I'm going to do today is head upstairs to the archives to have a look at some of the Christmas cards and the letters to Santa. Let's start here with these Christmas stamps. The first Christmas stamps were released back in 1966, but these ones, designed by Yvonne Gilbert, are from 1984. They attracted a lot of criticism, believe it or not, because we can see Joseph holding the baby Jesus. Now let's talk about some letters to Santa. If you're watching with any wee folk, don't worry. I've kept the magic intact and made this section of the video safe for all to enjoy. The museum has just one letter to Santa on display today, but back in 2021 they did host an entire exhibition that I didn't get a chance to see, so hopefully they'll do that again in the future. Let's have a look at the one that is on display from 1980 from Yorkshire. Dear Santa, at Christmas, please will you give me a toy sink and tea set and cooker, like the one at the sweet shop. And please will you get me a nearly alive doll. With all my love, Katie McInnes, age 7. P.S. Please get my cat a tin of sardines. If you know Katie, please send her this video. And if you're watching, Katie, comment and let us know if you got what you asked for, especially those sardines for your cat. Now, the earliest known letter sent from a child to Santa in England was sent in 1895, and then by the early 1900s, children across the country were sending thousands to Father Christmas annually, which started to overwhelm the staff at the return letter office. See, they didn't have the right address for the big man, and they would have to return the letter to sender. So eventually, Royal Mail decided to start helping Santa out. They sent off the first reply in December 1963, with over 7,500 cards posted that year. To this day, Royal Mail delivers thousands of replies to children across the country who address their letters to Santa. Remember, Santa Claus is often called Father Christmas here in the UK, so if you address your letter to Santa or Father Christmas, the post office will make sure he gets it no matter what. I do have to say, as a Canadian transplant here in England, that I do appreciate Canada Post's take on this tradition. If you want to send a letter to Santa from Canada, you can include his postal code, which is, of course, HOHOHO. Ho ho ho. Volunteer mail elves send lovely handwritten and personalized notes back to the children. Best of all, you don't have to be Canadian. Here's the address: Santa Claus, North Pole, HOHOHO, Canada. Just make sure you affix the correct postage to make it all the way to Canada, but Santa will take care of the return postage. He would like it to arrive by December 2nd, so it's too late for this year, but you can plan ahead for next year. Now let's move on to the Christmas card. Unlike the Christmas tree and many other traditions we think of as British, the Christmas card is a purely English invention, and we can see a few here. Sir Henry Cole came up with the idea of a commercial Christmas card in 1843 and had his artist friend John Calcott Horsley create the design. He was trying to save himself from having to write dozens of individualized letters to his friends, but the idea caught on. Realizing his own stroke of genius, he had thousands printed and sold them for $1 each, which would be the equivalent to about £3.75 today. Christmas cards become more common in the 1860s with the upper classes, and the introduction of postcards in the 1870s made sending mass-produced Christmas cards even more affordable and popular. To further distinguish themselves, the upper and middle classes then began sending elaborate and embossed cards decorated with lace, pressed flowers, and even seaweed. Now let's look at a few of these cards that are on display. Here is a card with a robin on. But why are robins a symbol of Christmas? Well, the answer dates back again to the Victorian era, as it so often does, and to the inventor of the penny post that we'll talk about shortly, Rowland Hill. Victorian postmen already wore bright red uniforms and had gained the nickname robins. Victorian card illustrators began depicting an actual robin delivering your Christmas card in its beak. Robins also happen to sing throughout the year and they don't migrate away, so that might be another reason for their association. Now, for my North American viewers, do note that the European robin is a small bird, part of the flycatcher family, with a red-orange breast and face, as opposed to the North American robin, which is a part of the thrush family and is much, much bigger. We'll see some lovely robin decorations in the gift shop a bit later on. Now here's a heartwarming card from the Postmaster General of Trinidad and the staff of the Trinidadian Post Office, wishing the employees of the London Postal Service a Merry Christmas. Here's one in French. It says Joyeux Noël, Merry Christmas, sent from Madeleine and Bertha sometime in the 1920s or 30s. Research suggests that Bertha was a refugee from Belgium after World War I. This is a Victorian triptych card with 3 scenes for each panel. The Victorians were very into their Christmas cards, as you can tell. And I love this Christmas poster in Welsh, reminding you to send your post in time for Christmas. We'll visit the gift shop a bit later on and have a look at the contemporary Christmas cards that the museum is selling. Okay, let's head back downstairs and let's properly delve into the museum and its year-round collection. Henry VIII was the first to establish a master of the posts, as he recognized that important people needed to send missives across vast distances. However, it was truly restricted to the elite, and it wasn't until 1660 when Charles II recognized that there was money to be made. The domestic mail service was operated by so-called postboys, which we will see mirrored again a bit later on with the messenger boys on motorcycles during World War I. They were required to traverse great distances, carrying important information and valuables, which often proved irresistible to thieves and highwaymen, that is, robbers who steal from victims on roads and highways. Therefore, it was imperative that the postboys carry weapons, but of course, they weren't always able to defend themselves or the mail. Delays were common, and a ton of mail went missing, never to be seen again. By 1784, a new prime minister took the stage. At just 24 years old, he really deserved the name William Pitt the Younger. He wanted a new mail system, and he listened to theater director John Palmer, who thought that a fancy little stagecoach like this one might be just the answer. This was a prototype that was used for a trial to get the mail between Bristol and London, a journey that used to take 1.5 to 2 days, and it took just 13 hours with this trial. It was so successful that a fleet of stagecoaches was immediately commissioned. This one's cool. Inside the cabin, 4 passengers could ride. This was considered a great method of transport, as the mail coach kept to a strict schedule at a time when transport was often unreliable. The driver would be up front, and then on this seat back here, the uniformed mail guard would ride. Here is a picture of Moses Nobbs. He worked for the Royal Mail for 55 years, long enough to live to have his photo taken in the era of photography. Fun fact, these guys were actually the first uniformed mail employees, and you can see that their kit still very much included weapons to defend the mail. Now that was the main delivery method for domestic mail, but we are on an island surrounded by many smaller British islands, and there was a growing demand for overseas mail. These parcels and letters were carried by packet ships. These were sailing ships that carried passengers, cargo, and mail on a regular schedule. They get their name packet from the original purpose of the ship, which was to carry post office mail packets. Just like the postboys and the stagecoaches, they had to be armed, as many people sent valuable packages overseas. The boats were armed with guns and cannons to protect their hulls. Just like stagecoaches, they often carried additional passengers and cargo. They were, of course, very vulnerable to pirates, as illustrated with these 3 little dioramas. Packet ships were eventually replaced by steamships, and by 1840 the term Royal Mail Ship, or RMS, came into use. This referred to any ship, including many passenger ships owned by luxury lines, that was contracted to deliver mail by Royal Mail. Today it's much more common to send mail by air, but the designation, or a variation of the designation, is still used by 3 ships today. The RMS Seguin, which is a passenger vessel in Ontario, the RMV Cylonian III, which serves the Isle of Scilly, and RMS Queen Mary II. The most famous RMS ship in history is surely the RMS Titanic, which was bringing mail from England to New York. 5 postal workers actually went down with the ship as they attempted to rescue the mail they were tasked with protecting. Now, back here at home in the early 19th century, sending mail was still prohibitively expensive for most people. You can see here that it was free for MPs, but they were likely some of the only people who could have actually afforded to pay for it. See, back then, it was the recipient of the letter who had to pay, and the fee was based on the number of the sheets used, not the weight or the size. Look here, you could see a letter on which someone has cross-written. That is, they've used every available inch of space to write left to right, side to side, and diagonally. Can you read it? I can't. And the post office hasn't actually been able to fully decipher it. Now, to make matters easier for the post office and public, in 1840, Sir Rowland Hill proposed using an adhesive stamp to indicate postage that had been prepaid. That's when the penny black stamp was introduced, which was, of course, just 1 penny. That meant that everyone in the country, nearly everyone, could afford to send letters for the first time. Literacy skyrocketed as people began sending more and more letters. British people sent 347 million letters in just 1 year, and post boxes had to be emptied up to 10 times a day. The penny black was very short-lived because you couldn't always see the cancelled mark across the stamp. It was replaced by the penny red in 1841. You could see here this incredibly rare and expensive full sheet of penny black stamps. The Postal Museum is the only known owner of a full sheet. This full sheet is heavily protected because stamp collectors are willing to pay insane amounts of money for these. Just 1 unsent penny black can go for £10,000. This block is 240 stamps, so I'll do the math for you. That makes it worth around 2.4 million or more. No wonder it's behind a lot of protective glass. Now, of course, you would have originally had to take your mail to an actual post office, and those could be scarce, especially in rural areas. So we can see here one of the first pillar box post boxes here, and it is an unusual color. It is green and not red. After their introduction in 1852, post boxes were this green color, which was a problem. In a rural setting like Jersey, where this one is from, it would blend in with the countryside. And in urban settings, with the Victorian smoke and pollution, they couldn't be seen easily. And so in 1874, they were changed to red, the color they have been since. We can see the cipher here, the initials of the monarch when this postbox was created. This one is for VR, or Victoria Regina, Queen Victoria. Her cipher later changed to this one in script. To this day, the monarch's cipher is on every new postbox that gets placed. I always notice a lot of King George V, and there are a bunch of Edward VII's around the British Museum. And of course, it's always cool to see a Queen Victoria postbox because they're the oldest. Elizabeth II, they're obviously the most common. What's the rarest? Well, currently, it's a C3. There's only one, Charles III's, and it's in Great Camborne. But even by the time I post this video, there could be another one. Whenever a postbox needs replacing, it'll have the new cipher on it. The second rarest is Edward VIII. Remember, he was only the monarch for 325 days. There's only a few hundred throughout the United Kingdom. There's one here in the museum next to some of the stamps created for Edward VIII. Now, another weird postbox fact is that in Scotland, ever since the crowning of Elizabeth II in 1952, the postboxes there have not been printed with the royal cipher. Instead, they're printed with St. Andrew's crown. That's because Elizabeth's cipher says E2, and she wasn't the second Queen Elizabeth in Scotland, was she? No, Queen Elizabeth I was never the queen there, and this was actually very offensive to some people. There was no easy answer to this. I mean, they couldn't put the cipher of E1. That just wouldn't make sense. And so the crown of St. Andrew was used instead. And it will likely remain the symbol for the future, even when more C3s come out. Now look at this. I love this pneumatic tube. This is how they used to transport mail from one end of the building to the other. It really reminds me of Mad Men. I love this. Okay, let's give this pneumatic tube system a test. I've got to walk back through the entire museum to go and retrieve my message. All right, let's see here what it says. Well, would you look at that? It says, Merry Christmas from the Museum Guide. Now we're entering the section of the museum dedicated to the wars. Of course, keeping in touch is always more important than ever in wartime. There are quite a few displays dedicated to wartime posts, but I'm just going to touch on a few here. Remember, I said we'd bring up those post boys used during Henry VIII. Well, here's a motorcycle used by the telegram boys in World War I. Here's another fascinating World War I display. Letters and postcards from a man called Harry to and from his family. He was a prisoner of war at a POW camp in Germany, yet under the Hague Convention his letters, heavily censored, were indeed delivered to and from his family for years. Now, according to that convention, this had to be free of charge for prisoners of war. Parcels of Vital Lifeline could be sent every 3 months, and it's amazing we have these letters. The family chose to donate them. Now let's move on to World War II. During the Blitz, bombs were literally falling as the posties tried to do their jobs, and they put together salvage teams to save letters from bomb sites. Wow, this photo, I mean, it shows you the dedication. Now here's a caricature of a man called Arthur Mowbray, known as the Demon Postmaster. It says he revels in shells. He was the postmaster in Dover, which was known as Hell's Corner because of the constancy and ferocity with which it was bombed, but he kept the mail system safe and running. As you can imagine, what was then called the GPO, or the General Post Office, employed thousands of women during the Second World War, just as they had done during the First. What I didn't really realize was that the post office used to operate the phone lines, and women usually operated the telephone exchange. Here we can see the British Empire Medal awarded to Winifred Scanlon. She was one of the brave women that kept the telephone exchange going under the most dangerous conditions and when bombs were literally falling overhead. Now, the telephone women were not the only women employed by the GPO during the war. It's said she would brush rubble off of her lap and get back to connecting the lines. Women took up the slack and did all of the jobs usually done by men, and they were good at them. However, this athletic Scottish postie, Jean Cameron, thought that her uniform, which was a skirt, was a bit silly for the demands of her job. She demanded the right to wear trousers. She said, "I go 15 miles a day with the mail. I use a cycle, and where there are no roads, I have to walk. There are dikes to climb, rocks to be got over, and very often I have to cross the River Esk. The mail, you see, even in this lonely glen, has to go through." In 1941, the GPO authorized that postwomen could choose to wear either trousers or a skirt on duty. For decades, the female postie trousers were called Camerons in Jean's honor. And we'll come back to uniforms a bit later on. Now let's move on to the post-war period. I love this wall of posters. So many of them have to do with Christmas. Let's have a look at some of these. 23 million letters a day, wow, and many more at Christmas. I love this shaggy dog. And this is a really cool crab, so mid-century. I could see having some of these on my wall. Now you can see that some of the posters are begging and pleading with the public to post early, like we talked about earlier. Please post early to avoid disappointment. Their workload skyrockets at this time of year. Here's a nice snowman telling us to post our parcels by December 19th and letters by the 21st. It's just like the Welsh one. I do it even earlier because mine have to get to Canada. Now, the earliest notice the museum holds mentioning this plea dates from 1879, but by posting early, they meant doing so back then on December 24th, and that's because there used to be a Christmas Day delivery service. Huh. Now, I love this, with the cat perched atop his head. Now, speaking of cats, check out this little stuffed cat. He's one of the Postal Museum's little mascots. Cats have a long history with Royal Mail. They were first officially, quote, hired to catch rodents in 1868. 3 cats worked on probation at the money order office in London, and they were paid 1 shilling a week for their upkeep. Luckily, they, quote, did their job very efficiently, and their pay was raised to 6 shillings a week. Hopefully they got some sardines at Christmas. Now, the most popular of all was named Tibbs the post office cat, born in November 1950. He was a very well-fed chappie, as you can see, feasting on mice and probably many treats, and he weighed 23 pounds and lived in the headquarters refreshment club, of course. He kept the post office headquarters completely mouse-free during his 14 years of service. The last post office headquarters cat, Blackie, died in June 1984, and there have been no more cats employed at the headquarters. Oh. That said, Tibbs lives on. He is the mascot of this museum, and he has his very own children's books. Ah, cool. Look at this old Morris Minor van. This one was customized specifically for post office needs. Now here we can see a large plaster cast of a young Queen Elizabeth for her stamps. This was done by Arnold Machen in 1967 and is known as the dressed head. It can, of course, be used on its own or used in the corner of the thousands of different designs popular since the middle of the last century. You can see all of these entertainment and sports-themed ones. I love this Rocky Horror one. Now, how great is this? Well, if you lived in a remote area of the UK in the 1960s through to just a few years ago, you might have ridden a bus like this. The Royal Mail buses serviced parts of this country that didn't have reliable bus service. You could hitch a ride with a postie, just like you could all the way back in the 18th century in the stagecoaches. The first post bus ran in Wales in February 1967, and the last in Sunderland, Scotland in 2017, a half-century that saw 220 routes operated across Great Britain. They were mainly in Scotland and the southeast of England. The last in England ran in Malton, North Yorkshire in 2012. This particular bus is from the Canterbury to Crundale route, where it was a familiar sight. I can't resist goofing around with some of the hats. There's a great selection of uniforms, old and new, including some of the newest, looking very sporty, and a very cool juxtaposition between the old and the new here. I love these, and here's Jean Cameron again. I also really like the display of the post office saris, designed in 1992, when the post office staff complained that the available uniforms didn't suit their needs. These are so pretty. There are also maternity dresses on display. Of the hundreds of uniforms in the museum's collection, they have only a few pieces of maternity wear. Maternity uniform options have only been available since the 90s. Before that, pregnant employees just wore larger sizes, which really doesn't work. As we saw with Jean Cameron, women's uniforms often take the back burner and require agitation and protest for change. Alright, let's check out the gift shop and have a look at some of the cool bits and pieces that are on display. You can see lots of children's books, lots of great gifts, and very cool Christmas cards, as well as, of course, robin decorations. Now we're making our way across the street to go to the most exciting part of the Postal Museum, Mail Rail. Just a quick note that the Postal Museum and the Mail Rail are just about half a block away from each other, and you do have to walk through the potential cold and wind to get there. I'm not even joking, this was genuinely a delight. The Mail Rail attraction uses the real train cars that used to transport mail beneath London's busy, traffic-clogged streets. All the way back in 1863, the post office began trialing a pneumatic system, there's the pneumatic tubes again, to propel underground train cars. This was the year the London Underground opened, so underground rail travel was a hot topic. The wrought iron pneumatic cars would be sucked through underground tubes, and while it was successful, no agreement was ever reached to actually build this, and so the plans were shelved, but here is a prototype car. However, the congestion on London streets was getting worse and worse by the turn of the 20th century, and so in 1913, plans for an underground electric railway for the mail were finally approved. The new railway operated 21 meters or 70 feet below the ground through 6.5 miles of tunnels with 8 stations from Paddington to here in Mount Pleasant, close to Farringdon. Trains officially began running on the 5th of December 1927. The trains run through a single 3-meter, that is 9 feet diameter tunnel on a double 2-foot gauge track. The container I'm sitting in right now dates to 1980 and could hold 15 bags of letters or 6 bags of parcels. Not too bad. Even into the late 90s, mail rail moved up to 4 million pieces of mail a day, with even more at Christmas, until the system was suspended in 2003. But speaking of Christmas, mail rail has a special stop this time of year, and so I'm going to let them do the talking. Let's go, and you can actually ride on the mail rail with me for a few minutes here.
Now, let's go a bit further back, to the early days in the 1930s. Then there was no email, texting, or instant messaging. People relied on the mail much more than today, especially at Christmas. So there was a lot to move. Trainloads of mail arrived at every station every few minutes, with less than 60 seconds to unload and reload. Let's follow a few of those letters. This is the Colonel. He's writing to the BBC. This is Kathleen. She's keeping in touch with her sweetheart in the Navy. And this is Mary. Her letter is very special because it's going to, ho ho ho, Father Christmas.
Darling bird, I can't tell you how sad I am that you're not coming home for Christmas. That baby has a lot to answer for. I have a good mind to close the Admiralty office and even what for.
To the Director General, British Broadcasting Corporation, I have recently purchased a television apparatus and feel compelled to inquire as to whether you're planning to broadcast moving pictures of the King's speech on Christmas Day.
Dear Father Christmas, it's me again, Mary Reardon. I wrote to you last year, if you remember. I asked for a puppy, but you brought me a dog's house instead. But I do still really want a puppy.
Father Christmas Day, the drawing of a puppy. Must be important. Here you go. Here we go again. Christmas. Coming through.
On that blooming cat.
Must go now, or I shall be late for work. Take good care of yourself, Bert, my love. And Merry Christmas, my darling. Kathleen.
I look forward to your response with keen anticipation. Yours sincerely, Colonel Arthur Bingley Crouch, retired.
Perhaps this year will be an odd year for puppies. I hope so. If there are any spare ones, I would be very grateful for one. Wishing you a very happy Christmas. Mary Reardon.
So those 3 letters travelled along mail rail and got delivered quickly and safely. You could say that mail rail was the beating heart of the British postal system.
Well, that was a lot of fun, and it's really interesting to see what the post office has to go through at Christmas time to get all the packages where they need to go. Now remember, if you want to watch the entire 15-minute mail rail ride, head over to Patreon. This is all available as a special Christmas bonus for all of my subscribers, even at the free level. Well, I just expected to pop in for a quick Christmas tale, but I ended up getting really invested in the entire museum, and I hope you enjoyed the tour. I'll see you the next time I'm at the museum, and Merry Christmas, everyone.